Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tinellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I make it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. Listeners, do I have a treat in store for you all today? A couple of years ago, I read a book called The Sparkle Pages, a fabulously witty, charming and heartwarming book about a woman's quest to find the missing spark in her marriage. The author, Tasmanian-based Meg Bignell, has written another 2 novels since. In 2021, Welcome to Nowhere River was released, and shortly, Meg's brand new novel, The Angry Women's Choir, will soon grace bookshelves around Australia. Having just finished this triumphant novel, I tell you, dear listeners, this is one book you absolutely must add to your teetering piles. I guffawed and snorted my way through the adventures of the various choir members and quietly shed a tear at some of the sadder moments in this delightful story. A tribute to female anger and the power we can harness when we band together and raise our voices. So it is with such pleasure that I welcome Meg to the podcast today. Hi, Meg.
Hi, Claudine. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. And I wanted to say this book was like a call to action to women around the world. It's a book that highlights women's experiences of not being seen or heard, of women being victimized or abused or being taken advantage of, and shaping that into a call to speak out. It was so inspiring and empowering. So I wanted to ask, where did the inspiration for the Angry Women's Choir come from?
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yes, I was hoping that it could make people feel that way, that it would be a sort of a call to action. So that's really lovely to hear. I think it was inspired by perimenopause and Trump being a knob in America and COVID kind of bringing women back to a place of martyrdom and sort of expected caregiving. So it was a combination of those things. I actually started the novel prior to COVID, and then I'm in Tasmania, so our lockdowns were very minimal. So please bear in mind that I'm not whinging at all. But with that lockdown that we had here, I found that I just actually couldn't write this book. I had to put it aside because my anger was, I was trying to have fun. I always want to have fun when I'm writing a novel, and I wasn't having fun writing it at that point because I was actually too angry and I was too close to the feeling that, you know, I've got 3 children in my workplace and I'm running their schooling and, you know, and in my situation, being married to a farmer, it meant that we were home more and I could wash his trousers and cook. So not much changed for him. So, you know, like it wasn't his fault. That's just how it happened. So I was angrier than usual and perimenopausal. So I put it aside. And when I came out of lockdown, I was able to pick it up with a bit more distance and get back into the fun side of it. Because even though this is full of rage, this book, I really wanted to make people laugh as well. So, which is what I aim to do with all my work. So it was essential that I have fun with it. I hope I've answered the question in that long diatribe, but yes, that's where the inspiration came from.
And I'm not laughing at you, but I'm laughing when I remember some of the more humorous aspects of this novel. And I think I mentioned before we started recording that I was laughing hysterically one morning reading a particular scene in this book, and I was laughing so hard I was actually crying. And that hasn't happened reading a book in such a long time for me. You absolutely have nailed the humorous aspect of this story.
Oh, I love that so much, laughing till you were crying, because I do like to take the reader on a bit of an emotional roller coaster. I tend to have a bit of devastation in there, but always bring it back to the laughter. And that kind of laughter theme, I spent a lot of time researching how activism can be creative and imaginative and fun. And the idea that it's hard to oppress someone who's laughing. That's a quote. It's not my words, it's a quote from somewhere which I can't remember off the top of my head, but I was really interested in that aspect and the idea that friendship and laughter can actually empower women to be creative with their rage.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Meg. So, for those who haven't had the opportunity to read it as I have, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the story.
It's the story of Freycinet, who I call my protagonist, even though it's an ensemble piece of work. She's kind of the reason the story carries through. So she is living a very sort of charmed, privileged, upper middle class life with beautiful children and a successful husband and everything you could hope for, except that she kind of has a schedule that's so full she can't fit. I know that this is kind of a trope, the middle class mother who's lost herself, but I hope that I take the reader on a journey that takes them out of that stereotype, because she accidentally falls into the very eccentric and musical world of the Westmooner Women's Choir, who have an alias as the Angry Women's Choir. And they learn from each other, and the story goes from there.
Brilliant. Now, I understand that you actually joined a choir before you wrote this novel. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I have been singing with Hobart Voice Academy for about 8 years, learning more about singing. I'm not a musical person, but I'm a musical enthusiast, and I'm a musical theatre tragic, and I do sing a little bit. I've written quite a few comedy sort of songs, and I really wanted to learn how to sing better. So I took myself along for lessons, and I met this incredible woman called Jude Elliott, who, instead of teaching me how to improve my range, she kind of taught me how to improve my life. She introduced me to a whole world of music and a world of musicians, and taught me that I was capable of so much more than what I thought I was. I'm still in doubt that I'm capable of the stuff she's made me do. We've ended up performing cabaret together and all kinds of things. She put me together with a few other singers in what I'd call probably an ensemble more than a choir. I think you need to have 10 people to call it a choir. So we were small, but all women, and it sort of got knocked aside by COVID, which is sad, like so many things, and we haven't rejoined yet. But I was already in the frame of mind that music and singing could be such a community builder, but that just reinforced it, and the time I've spent with them. And she's helped me develop the music for the book as well, which is another topic. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Was there that feeling of female fury in that choir that you were able to harness in the writing of this novel, or was that something that came completely outside of your experience?
No, I have to say that wasn't there, not evident to me, but that's from my imagination. I built my choir around the premise that they were formed in the 80s. So this group of women have been together for so long, they know each other so well.
Mm.
All kinds of things have happened in their lives that they've shared, and their rage, their sort of communal rage has built up, and they've found ways to express it that are productive and helpful and kind. That all came from my imagination.
Tell me a little bit more about the Furies. I think listeners would love to know.
Oh, the Furies. I had so much fun writing these, and it was so hard editing them back, because the Furies are what the choir do after they've sung their Westmooner Women's Choir repertoire. Then they sit in a circle and they have a word limit, but they say what has really pissed them off that week. It can be anything from, I am so sick of my husband shouting his sneezes, to I'm angry that I lost my husband. So, it goes from extremes, or some bastard stole my wheelbarrow, that kind of thing. And I tapped into a few Facebook groups where I'd noticed people had asked the question, what really pisses you off? And then I just wrote them all down into my notebook, and there were hundreds. And then, so I just kind of sorted through them and applied them various things to different characters. It was very fun. But the idea of the Furies is that it fuels the repertoire for the Angry Women's Choir, and then they get up and sing again, and it all comes out. It goes into the walls of the building, and they go home, and their lives run really smoothly.
Yeah. It felt very cathartic.
Yeah, that's the idea. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all just do that every week?
I
Sing it all
wonder,
out.
yes, I wonder how many of those furies in that Facebook group came from having to spend too much time with your family during COVID.
I'm sure there were so many. And and then we get back to our normal lives and everyone's flat out and busy and you kind of wish that you were back in lockdown. Like we're never happy. We're never happy.
Indeed. Meg, tell me about your inspiration for Freycinet Barnes. I mean, I found her to be such a wonderfully complex and engaging character. I love that she was this clever, incredibly skilled woman that was unappreciated by her family, let's face it, and her husband in particular.
Yeah. She started off very much more bland and beige. And I guess I've seen a pattern in my work, which I think probably wasn't that hard to pick up, but I've only just picked it up, that my protagonists have a lot of me in them and they are quite similar. So the Freycinet came out of the first draft quite similar to both Susanna and Cara, which are the protagonists from my other two novels, but actually even more sort of bland and annoying. And there were elements of her that were a little bit badass, but just not enough to be convincing. And so my publisher was like, well, I don't believe that badass stuff. So I think we either need to amp it up or take it out, probably take it out. And I thought, no, I loved writing that stuff. So I just amped it up. And it was so fun. And I am nothing like that. I am not brave or skilled in any manner of I won't go too much into
I know.
spoiler, but yes, she that was really fun to write. Again, so inspired by me, but very much expanded by how much fun I was having writing her and my imagination.
Yeah, it's really hard to talk about her and her, as you say, badass characteristics without actually giving away any spoilers. But
Mm.
suffice it to say that although it was clear that she adored her family and sacrificed her career to care for them all, she wasn't actually being true to herself, was she?
No, and this is a very common story. No, she wasn't. And as a result, it was never really going to work. And she needed to find that person again who was never gone, but just sleeping. That's a clue.
Indeed. Yes, a nice one. So I guess it really took finding the choir for her to take a good hard look at herself, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And don't they just hold you up to, they just held her up for her to have a good look at. And in some ways that was brutal, which did come back to bite everyone at some point down the track. I think it says in the blurb that sometimes a life could do with a bit of ruining. And I think that's true for Freycinet. She needed some destruction in her perfect life.
Yeah, that didn't end up being quite so perfect after all. The book is told from multiple points of view, as you've indicated before. We have Busy, the choir director, Freycinet herself, Rosanna, who's terminally ill, Grace, Freycinet's daughter, amongst others. All have something to say, all of whom have stories and a reason for feeling hard done by. So I wanted to ask you, Meg, did you always intend to use so many different points of view?
I actually started off with way more. So you can imagine my poor publisher, who's my first reader, and my agent just had to wade through this outpouring of it was like a burning polemic that just poured out of me in so many different points of view. And it was confusing. And, it's third person omniscient, but with these perspectives from these women. And there's 4 that prevail. Initially, I think they're about, I don't know, maybe 10, which is so bad. So then I had to do I wouldn't even call it a structural edit. I'd call it a complete rewrite for the second draft, which became the first draft, really. It's a challenge, actually, honing back those perspectives and getting those voices and working out who's speaking where, which point of view we've got at which point. That's really tricky. And my first novel was written in first person, and I think I found that tricky at the time, but now I'm like, I just can't wait to get back to first person, just for relief. But those 4 that ended up being my points of view, my main perspectives, just were the most interesting and the ones I had the most fun with. I keep going back to fun, but it's so important for me in my work. As you know, Claudine, this is hard, this stuff. Writing novels, writing books is hard, and you can't, it unearths so much inside you that you have to be able to have fun with it. I just wouldn't be able to do it. I'd have to go and look after the cows.
It's funny because you were talking about the Furies before, and you were saying how the women had a word limit in terms of conveying, what it was that pissed them off that day. And I have to say that reminded me of pitching. Because,
Yeah.
you have a time limit and you've got to stick to that. And it just felt like, my God, this pressure to convey everything about your story in 3 minutes or,
Oh, it's
7 minutes.
awful. I mean, that is awful. I've told myself so many times that next time I write a novel, I'm going to write the pitch first and then build the novel around the pitch. I'm not sure whether that's a really good, that's a good way to start a book, but it gets really hard. In the end, I have a wonderful writing teacher, Sarah Santilles, who encourages us to reduce an idea down to a haiku. And then I actually ended up, one of my characters did it in the book, and she wrote a haiku that's kind of sums up the book. And it's, all the women sing a chorus so thunderous, the world must tune in. So I was like, that's it. And it's a haiku with a rhyme, which probably is against the rules, but it has the right number of syllables. I love rhyme. So
I don't know that there is a rule against rhyming haikus.
yeah, I'm not sure. I must say I'm not a skilled haiku writer, but yeah, I'm not sure.
We'll get back to haikus a bit later.
Yeah. That's my challenge to all writers. Write your book as a haiku.
Meg, amongst the narrative points of view, there were what I called little vignettes from Rosanna, what she called stepping stones from La Lista, a list that she keeps of tips to pass on to her children when she dies. Can you tell me about those and why were they important to the story, do you think?
I think they brought because it's a busy story. There's a lot of stuff happening. I kind of liked to ground it back to Rosanna's beautiful perspective of the world, which is very much centered around kindness and nature. And she has this sort of inherent wisdom that's born of quite a bit of trauma in her childhood and upheavals and things, which I don't have because I've had such a charmed life. The other thing that happened was that Rosanna turned out to be a character that I missed so much once she'd gone. And that's not a spoiler because we know she's terminally ill, but I needed more of her. So originally those points were in a letter form earlier in the novel. So I ended up breaking that up and having it through the book so that the spirit of her, and she's so still present within the choir and within the music. So I wanted her to remain till the end, and that kind of is what came of that, her stepping stones.
Those stepping stones were a bit like an overarching theme in the book, and something that I think you could extrapolate from in terms of, what actually ended up happening in the book, kindness being her fundamental guiding principle for life, and, for her children to think about being kind. I think there was one that said, be kind, be kind, be kind, be kind.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's so easy to get caught up. And I know this firsthand because I've got 3 children of my own, and they're, all in their teens. They're busy, they're sort of peak busyness. And it's easy to forget the really important things. And it's very prevalent in my mind what my children are going to remember. Are they going to remember this crazy woman who was trying to write all the time and getting distracted and forgetting to pick them up, and or are they going to remember someone that really promoted kindness and brushing your teeth? My dedication is be kind, brush your teeth to my children. I think it is an overarching theme, is just to remind yourself, if you can, in the midst of all the busyness, of what's important, and also listen to yourself and what is going on with the music inside you is kind of where I'm trying to get at. I don't want to sound too woo-woo, but it's so busy. I know everyone's so busy and there's so many important things to attend to, but yeah, look after yourselves, be kind to yourselves, be kind to everybody else.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, speaking about music, I haven't actually read your second book, but I know from the first and the third that music is a large part of your writing. Freycinet sings and plays the violin, and Susanna from the Sparkle Pages, she plays the viola. Is that how you say it? Viola or viola?
Viola, yeah.
Yeah. Is including music as a theme in your books a conscious thing?
It creeps in. Yeah, I think it definitely crept in with Susanna with the Sparkle Pages. And then this was more of a conscious decision because I really wanted to center it around a choir. But it becomes bigger than what I intend. And I think that's telling of how important music is to me, even though I'm a bit crap at it and I play the guitar really badly and I envy every musician under the sun and I wish I could sing better than I do. It's so important to me to have music in my life and in the lives of my children. And it got bigger and bigger in this book because I think I mentioned Jude before, my singing instructor, who became my collaborator, because there are songs in the book. I couldn't afford to buy anyone else's lyrics because they range from, like really expensive to astronomically unaffordable. So I wrote my own lyrics, which I love writing rhymes and poems. So that came quite easily to me. And then that Jude sort of said, I think there's melodies coming out. And then I worked on the melodies and they became songs. And then we got singers in. Well, this is all driven by Jude with me looking bewildered
Wow.
in the background. So essentially we came up with a soundtrack for the book. So the music element became a lot bigger than it became quite literal in the end. And all the songs have been recorded and mastered and they're going onto the audiobook, and some of them are embedded into the narrative of the audiobook. And it's just been an absolute joy. And it's been a wonderful character development process, and it's just enhanced the writing and the fun. So yeah, I'm really proud of that side of it because it's not something I ever thought I'd be capable of doing, and now it's done and it's really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet it is. Now, speaking of the audiobook, I understand that you not only narrated your first book, The Sparkle Page, I think you've narrated all of them.
I've narrated two of them. So
Oh,
the
okay.
Sparkle Pages I narrated,
Yeah.
and then the wonderful Marta Dusseldorp narrated the Welcome to Noah River. And then this time around, I really wanted to challenge myself. Oh my God. I was like, how do I get myself into these situations? Because my first book was a diary written in first person. So it was kind of one voice. Excellent. Not too bad. And then this one is not only multiple voices, but there's multiple accents, there's singing, there's all kinds of stuff. And so it was intense and really difficult and so much work, but just an absolute joy.
Oh, I bet it was. I can't wait to listen to it. When I raced through the reading of this because I was so desperate to learn what happened, and I absolutely loved it. But I'd like to go back and really, take my time and listen to your dulcet tones as you
Oh
as you're
gosh, well,
reading it.
please, apologies to anyone who's Irish or German or French or English or Indonesian. I do my best, but I'm not perfect by any means.
Meg, what I love about your books as well is, and also your writing, is your evident love for Tasmania. You write with such fondness for your home state. And I wanted to ask you, would you ever think about writing a book set anywhere else?
Absolutely. It is time. I I do love Tasmania. I'm sixth generation Tasmanian, and I'm very proud of my state, and I write it with great love, but I also write it because it's what I know, especially since the world closed down. It's starting to get a bit claustrophobic, and I will definitely come back here in my novels, but I'm really ready to get off the island. And I can't physically do that just yet for extended periods of time, but I definitely want to take my mind there and my research elsewhere. Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. And so, speaking of, future novels, are you working on something else at the moment?
I am. It's actually at this very moment in time, it's really hard to get a good run on anything because there's a lot of work to be done to get this book out to the world. But I've got I've actually got three novel projects on the go, different lots of piles of research and notebooks. And I'm in that terrible phase where I'm not sure which one to kind of focus on and which one's going to kind of win out for this to be novel number 4. I think I've settled on it. I think that, and then tomorrow I think of something else. I think it's another one, but because I come up with another idea. But it's getting to me that I can't focus and hone in on that one, because then that beautiful momentum happens. I don't. How's your book going? Are you nearly there? Yeah. So that momentum, and I'm craving that so much. But the year has been crazy busy, and so many other things going on with the Angry Women's Choir that, book 4 will be coming out. I'm not sure when.
I said that we were going to talk a little bit about haikus, but I mean, I guess for listeners out there, and you've already mentioned, you've got music, you've got lyrics, and poems. They all feature quite heavily in this book, and it's a testament, I think, to your writing prowess, Meg, that you're able to give such colour and depth to your story using these different writing forms and techniques. Did you always think that that was the way that you would write, or is it just a product of this story that you use so many different forms?
I've always been interested in all the different forms of writing, and as I said, my first book was a diary, which I loved writing in that form. I love writing in letters. Going back to the draft 0 of the Angry Women's Choir, which had so many perspectives and so many characters and way too many words, I had so many different forms in that as well. I was exploring, and this comes from my teacher, Sarah Santillis, who encourages us during workshops and things to take a piece of our writing and turn it into a fairy tale, or turn it into a poem, or turn it into a letter or a medical report. So I was doing that kind of playing around with that stuff and having a lot of fun with it. And then a lot of it went into draft 0. A lot of it had to come out again. It was just way too confusing, but it was just, this is how I work. Like I just write a lot of quite confusing stuff, and then I hone it. Because if I try to sit down and plot, I can sit there for hours and nothing happens. So I'm just better to be writing. It's not wasted time. Having to cut 60,000 words is not a waste for me. And I never feel bad about killing darlings, because they're there, because it's part of my process. And so part of this process was working in so many different forms. And then I had to bring it back to just a few, because we don't want to confuse the reader too much. I'm sure there's enough in there anyway.
Well, I don't know that it's confusing, but it was just so fascinating for me to see how you were able to convey this incredible story using all these different techniques and mediums.
I think in some ways I worry sometimes that this book is an explosion of a sort of an expression of my trying to learn as a writer, because I'm in still early days for me in my career, and I want to improve so much. And sometimes I think, oh no, have I just written a book that just shows everyone how desperate I am to be better? Because it's got all these sort of experimental forms, I think I trust my publishers and my editor that we just got it back to something that doesn't say that too much, but that's what it was to begin with. Yeah. So I'm glad they worked for you. The different ways of storytelling that are set into it. I'm glad. That's lovely.
Meg, what would you like readers to take away from this novel?
I knew you were going to ask this, because you always ask this, and I should have prepared better. But I think my character Busy would say, and I agree with her, that maybe if they could walk away being a bit more awake to potential, and I don't want us to turn into a bunch of paranoid people, but just more awake to potential oppressions, things that could turn into ways to silence us as women or other minority groups. Just be more alert, because convention doesn't set the rules, and it's not truth. Empathy and art and imagination and kindness are much better truths than convention. And There's a wonderful expression that says convention is the enemy of art, just as it is the enemy of love. And I hope I'm not getting too weirdo, but that's what I'd like people to take away from this. Like, open your eyes a bit wider, bear witness, listen harder, and think a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Pleasure.
Meg, you might know that there are a lot of writers out there who listen to this podcast, and you've already, alluded to some tips and, in terms of the way that you approach your work. But I wondered if you had any tips for writers out there who are seeking publication or just looking to start writing.
Firstly, you don't need to surround yourself with other writers, but just find a few other people within the industry that you can tie your rope to and stay afloat with. That's been so important in my career. The other tip, which is not my tip, again, it's Sarah Centilli's, says at the end of a writing session, write yourself a love note. She calls it a love note. Sometimes mine are not particularly loving, but write it to yourself. And just, even if it's just, hi, Meg, today went okay. Don't forget that tomorrow you need to do this and this, and you want to look at this part of your structure. It might be just as technical as that, or it might be, Meg, you're amazing. Like, well done. It's so amazing that you've got 3 books out there. And, you can write whatever you want in your love note because no one else is going to read it. So no one's going to think, oh, gosh, she's got a big head or whatever. You can say how wonderful you think you are, or you can really berate yourself. And it just brings me back to the work the next day. Every time I open up my work and there's my note from yesterday, and either I can dismiss it or laugh at it, or it will just get me back into my work. And that's been a huge tip. So that's just 2 little things, hopefully, that could help potential writers. And read. There's not enough people reading. We need less people looking at Netflix and more people reading books.
Amen. I agree. Thank you so much for sharing those tips. That's wonderful. I love the idea of a little love note to yourself at the end of a writing session. I think that's brilliant.
Oh yeah, it's just a lovely little bit of self-care and self-discipline, and gets your mind. We're so busy. We've got to get our minds back into the work as often as possible and as quickly as possible, because there's going to be another interruption. So
yeah. Indeed. Okay, so Meg, if listeners wanted to learn more about you and your books, where can they find you?
I do have a website, megbignell.com.au, and they can sign up for my newsletter there, which I put out once a month, which will talk a lot about other people's work and then a little bit about mine. And my books are in your local bookstore. Please go and buy it from your bookshop, because we love booksellers.
Meg, I thoroughly enjoyed reading The Angry Women's Choir, and I have a feeling this story is not going to have any problem finding its audience. I wish you every success with it. Thank you so much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Thank you so much, Claudine. I've loved having a chat with you today. Thank you.
That's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please drop me a line via my webpage at claudinetinellis.com, via Instagram, Facebook or Twitter. Alternatively, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or Google Podcasts. Until next time, happy reading.